What is the point of a course?
The point of a course? I'd say the point of a course is to expand and build on previously known knowledge.
What is the point of a course?
I think the point of this course is to look at different forms of literature in student-centered formats, also using technology.
What is the point of a course? Good answer. What is the point of a course?
To learn.
There's one thing even more special about this course. It's online. Shouldn't that limit a student? Wouldn't there be less materials at their disposal? Well, I'm not really sure about that. The course is a way of treating each individual trait of the course in its own different way. When it comes to oral communication, who is listening to you speak is important. I'm not going to talk about students the same way I talk to, say, a businessman. I'll try to be more articulate, use immaculate syntax, and try my best not to use LOL. If the elderly can understand me, anyone can, so I try to make that my goal. Appealing to your audience is essential for improving as a speaker. Each writer will interpret ambiguities in your work wholly differently. It is important to be clear and concise to best convey your thoughts without any misunderstandings or confusion. A live audience may interpret something completely differently than the podcast. It's really important to know your audience. When it comes to presentations, pacing yourself is essential when managing time. You don't want to bore your audience with paragraphs and paragraphs of information. You want to have a little fun. It's a very important strategy for improving as a speaker. You also need to avoid looking ill-prepared. This involves knowing your presentation by heart. You want to walk around, interact with the audience without ever looking at your slides. I even like to completely omit words and leave maybe a title. Continue to work on these aspects of oral speaking is essential to being the best speaker possible. The assignment that best displays my skills as a speaker was the Synthesis podcast. By using various auditory codes and conventions, I could demonstrate charisma and my speaking skills. Now for the bread and butter of English, writing. I tend to write, as they call it, flowery. I would consider myself a strong narrative and argumentative writer. My love for describing things in the most artsy way possible fits with the typical narrative structure, or lack thereof. For those who know me personally, I also love to argue. When I catch that fallacy slowly coming out of my interlocutor's mouth, the satisfaction of making him suffer is absolutely incredible. Don't get me started with ad hominems. The thing I need to improve on as a writer most is brevity. I tend to get a little out of control, being a little too philosophical sometimes. I am a personal fan of Nietzsche, so I tend to bring him up a lot. It may not always be relevant, but, you know, I love him. He's great. But I do need to try and be concise and be more clear, and soften down word choice a lot, because it'll make things, more understandable for all audiences. Then there's the writer's block. Sometimes I can sleep it off. Sometimes 3 espresso shots do the trick. Sometimes I just cry for about 4 hours. But honestly, the best way of overcoming writer's block is by eliminating distractions. It's easy to start watching TV or scrolling through Facebook. Avoiding that, but also importantly, taking a break. You need to give your brain a break after doing hours and hours of work. Writer's block is most of the time a result of stress and shutting yourself out from the rest of the world. Especially in the online, it's easy to forget to experience the beautiful weather outside. Have some fun. Smell the ravishing flowers. Listen to the gorgeous birds. Don't forget it's still summer. Have some fun. The assignment that best reflects my ability as a writer is Unit 3's narrative essay. I got to truly share my thoughts, and this type of essay did not limited me formatting-wise, so I was free to articulate my own thoughts. I got to talk about seemingly trivial things like what I had for breakfast that day, or what I was whistling down a street. Yet I also got to talk about an exceedingly deep issue in the world. Now, I love movies. It's quite a known thing. My favorite book is only my favorite book because it's the source material for my favorite show, Game of Thrones, or Song of Ice and Fire. My biggest weakness as a result is reading big pieces of writing. I tend to get distracted and sometimes even bored. I read The Handmaid's Tale, and it now has an adapted Emmy-nominated television series. It was tempting to ditch the book and sit back and couch it out. But a strategy to try and fix this was creating an easy environment for myself to read, somewhere that was relaxing and quiet and allowed me to just focus. It still ended up being the most interesting thing I read this term. It was beautifully written, very dark, what I like. I did not necessarily relate to the characters, but I understood their motives. And the fantasy aspect was extremely creative, and the theocratic regime reminded me a lot of other works like 1984 by George Orwell. And speaking of Orwell, the most difficult text I read was his essay, Politics in the English Language. His use of archaic vernacular and older metaphors made it very hard to understand. He even mentions a lot of Latin phrases, even though he was critiquing their use. It being a part of the content itself created a much more difficult text to read. A dictionary was my best friend while reading this. I also tried to analyze the context and may have learned a little bit of Latin. Mutatis mutandis. But my strength as a writer is analyzing various symbolism. I love looking in depth much farther than just the lines themselves. To continue improving my writing in the future, reading more books would certainly help. And books will forever be continued to be made, and I have lots of opportunity to do so.
It's obvious. The medium is the message.
This is a fun little quote, but I don't know if I necessarily agree. The medium is of course important, but it's not the message itself. You can certainly separate the medium and the message. Many different types of mediums can exhibit the same message. For instance, take Unit 5's TED Talk and essay about feminism. Both evidently try and push a feminist agenda, per se, and yet they use completely different types of mediums. One that's purely written versus one that is purely spoken. Reading, writing, listening, and speaking are all essential in English. And the class did a lot to help. We did lots of things that I loved, some things that I definitely hated. But I'm just going to be honest with you. But that's okay, because you can handle the truth.